All right, so Sara Branco, let's talk
Hi.
about fungi.
Yes. What do you want to know?
I want to know everything. Can we quickly just talk about how weird sex is in fungi, and then we'll talk more about the
All right.
tritrophic endophytic
Uh,
stuff that you were working on.
yeah. So lots of things are weird about fungi,
Yeah.
and sex is definitely one of them. The most weird, easy to grasp thing is that many species have what we call, many sexes.
Hmm.
It's a little complicated because it's not in most fungi you don't have sexes like animals and plants have.
Right.
You do we what we have what they have, not we, are
You
mating
can you
type.
can say we. It's okay. You're a mycologist. It's okay.
It's us.
Yeah.
They have mating types, and what that means is that they have genes in specific regions in specific chromosomes that code for being mating type A or B or alpha or beta, depending on the groups
Mhm.
of fungi. And in order for individuals to be compatible, the the mating types have to be different. So if you can't mate with an individual that has the same mating types as you have.
Mhm.
One of the biggest differences between mating types and sexes, between the fungal mating types and the normal sexes that we're used to, is that there's no, for the most part, there's no other secondary characters that are associated between male or female,
Right.
right? When you think about lions, then you think about male lion and the female lion, it's obvious that they're different, right?
Yeah.
In fungi, it's only these genes that are different. And what happens is that many species have 100 and 150 different alleles that can go into these genes.
Mhm.
And so you have a ton of different combinations of individuals that can be compatible.
Yeah.
And if in terms of evolutionary biology, uh, one of the ways to explain the reason why we would have like this 150 different mating types, which makes no sense, is that it's really advantageous to be rare because you're going to be compatible with everybody.
Right.
So any mutations that arise that are not deleterious are going to stick, and
Yeah.
they're going to increase in frequency until you have individuals that are going to be interacting with the same mating type, and then they can't mate anymore, and then the frequency is going to decrease a little bit.
Right. And so if it also prevents inbreeding, right? Or it prevents selfing, right?
Yes, so
So
there's yeah, exactly. So there are these genes. So it's, for the most part, it's like a two lock system where you
mhm.
have two steps to be able to mate.
Gotcha.
Um, and so for compatibility to occur, you have to be different on these two genes. And so yeah, on one hand, you do not have, you have those barriers to avoid inbreeding, but on the other hand, uh, you have a system that benefits anything that is rare.
Yeah.
And so that explains why you have this multitude of mating types. Interestingly, it does not occur in all species. Some species only have two mating types, and they're perfectly happy having only two
Yeah.
mating types. So,
Is
it's
is there an ecological correlate of where you find more mating? Like, are they?
um,
Is this all mycorrhizal fungi that you're talking about,
no,
or?
I'm talking about pathogens and like
Oh,
plant.
cool.
I studied when I was a postdoc. I studied this specific plant pathogen that infects plants in the carnation family
Okay.
and only has two mating types.
Hmm.
And let me just say a little bit about the biology of this fungus because it's
Yeah.
amazing. So it is evil. You basically don't see it. We don't know where it lives,
Mhm.
and when it infects plants, the only thing that you see is that when the flower comes out, instead of yellow pollen, it has dark pollen. And what happens is that the fungus suppresses the pollen production, and instead, in the anthers of the plant, it produces its spores. So when the pollinators
Oh,
come,
cool.
so cool.
Very
And
cool.
this only happens on the male flowers. But the coolest thing is that when you have dioecious plants, so the plants that have separate sexes,
Mhm.
it forces the female plant to produce male flowers. So, So we can, yeah, I know. So we so we
That
can't
blew
be,
your mind so much your headphones came out. Yeah.
exactly. So they have really weird strategies to to do their business. They're just
That's
trying to
wild.
pass their genes.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah. Yeah. So I think that we'll stick to this for the sex parts, because
Okay, yeah.
I could
It's too
speak.
much.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I could speak the whole day.
Yeah. What's the taxonomy of the fungus? Because some students in the class have taken mycology and stuff. So what's
Oh,
like the
okay.
approximate,
Okay, so
what?
these one that I was talking about, it's called an anther smut. So
Okay.
it's a Basidiomycota
Gotcha.
that is not a normal mushroom with your stalk
Mm-hmm.
and with your stem and your cap. It's a plant associated fungus
Gotcha.
that is an early diverging lineage within the Basidiomycota.
Cool. Okay, cool. That's all. Yeah, just for, because some people do actually know a lot about.
Do actually know, yeah, exactly.
There's probably like 15 students in the class out of 180 that have taken, a
Ooh,
few
that's
mycology
amazing.
classes. I know. Yeah.
Let me
Well,
just,
it's
yeah, big shout out to you, budding mycologists.
yeah. Yeah, I think, well, it is cool. I mean, just a cool thing about SUNY ESF is that it is nothing against pre-meds, but because we're a forestry school, we have a lot of undergrads who are really interested in organisms and ecology and stuff.
In real stuff.
Yeah. Real stuff like mycology.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So do you want to talk about the endophytic fungi now?
Yeah. So this is another project that I started with this fungi that they're so in evolution, for the most part, you see whatever works, right?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it's not about optimization. It is not about being perfect. It's like whatever works, and that's good. And sometimes there are many things that work, and when there are many things that work, it can be really advantageous to have all these strategies to be able to persist depending on what's available to you, right? Hmm. And so there's these fungi that are they're endophytic, so they live within the tissues of plants, of living plants, without causing any symptoms. So they're not. This is the definition of an endophyte: not causing any symptoms.
Gotcha.
There's evidence that some of them are latent pathogens, so they're just waiting for the plant to be weak so they can take over, or some others that are waiting for the plant to die so they can eat it.
Yeah, or like with deciduous trees, right? Like when the leaves drop in the fall, they're the first ones there.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like a priority effect kind of thing.
Exactly. But as far as we know, many of them are. We don't know what they're doing in a lot of the time that the plant is alive, right. And there's evidence that some of them confer some stress resistance or resistance to herbivory or whatever, but there's a big group of fungi that they're just hanging out. We don't really know what they're doing,
and it's crazy levels of diversity too.
Oh, man,
right?
It's
in
ridiculous.
Some cases, like that I remember that Hawaii paper that came out where it's like one species of tree has like 1,000 endophytes or something ridiculous like that.
There's a ton of them, and it's really hard. And it's hard to understand what they're doing just because there's so many of them. Like if there were two, you could set up some experiments, try to figure it out. At 1,000, a little harder. But then there's this specific group of endophytes that can also be insect pathogens. And so what we know is that they have the ability to infect larvae of insects.
Oh, cool.
And kill them, and sometimes very fast.
Oh, interesting.
And so one of the questions has been like, what's up with this, right? Because living inside a plant tissue and killing an insect is a little different. So do they have different toolkits? Do they, how on earth do they do it? And so people have been looking into this, and basically what they found is that they do not have necessarily different strategies, but they use some of the tools for both lifestyles in both situations. And so like they have adhesion genes that are important for getting to the plant and then attaching to the insect. there's some questions of, how to overcome immune systems, because it's different to be a non-pathogen and non-threatening and just being able to tell the plant, I am your friend, I'm not going to
Right.
harm you, and to escape the immune system of the insect, because in
Yeah.
that case it's like I am going to eat you. So there's some molecular work trying to figure out which genes are involved in those strategies, and I think the take-home message is that some are used for both strategies, and then some specific genes kind of light up only in one situation or the other, as
Gotcha.
you would expect.
Yeah.
And so in my lab, we did some experiments with with a set of specific fungi, where one of my undergrads grabbed some spores and sprayed some wheat plants to see if there was any effect on the plant. And then we had some larvae of this stem sawfly, which is a pest that decimates a lot of the wheat fields in the West. It's actually a big problem. And it's an amazing insect. What it does is that it lays its eggs inside the hollow stem of wheat, and the larva. So the eggs hatch, and the larva stays inside the plants for a whole winter, and while it's there, it's just eating up the stem of the wheat. And then when spring comes, the wheat breaks and there's no crop, there's no production.
Oh yeah.
And the problem is that because it's inside the stem, you can spray all you want, that is, you're not going to affect you. It's really hard to kill this insect.
Right. Yeah, because it's
Yeah. And so one of the things people have been trying is, well, maybe we can use these fungi that are insect pathogens and endophytes, and we could put the fungus in the plants. And so when the larvae are inside, if they're chewing up, they're going to die because they're getting infected.
Yeah.
And so we did only the first two steps were to see what the effect on the plant was, and then what the effect on the larvae were. So my undergrad got a bunch of wheat stems, kind of opened them up to get the larvae, and then we basically just showered them with a solution of spores to see what happened.
Yeah.
And it was like a horror movie.
Oh, cool.
After 2 days, if you put it under the dissecting scope to look at the larvae, because they're kind of small, right?
Yeah.
You look at the mouth parts, and there was hyphae growing all over.
Oh, cool.
You wait another day, and it's encapsulated in mycelia.
Whoa.
It's like a mummy. It was so gross.
That's awesome. Do you have pictures somewhere? You
should. I do. I can try to find some and send you if you want to.
That would be cool. I mean, I bet some of the students would be interested. Yeah, but don't do it if it's hard. But if it's easy, then it would be cool.
Yeah. And so the experiment that we haven't done yet, and that I will try, and some other people are trying too, is. So we did the experiment separate to see what was going to happen, but ideally you want to put the fungus on the plant,
right,
and then see if it works. It's a little tricky because making sure the fungus sticks on the plant, given that there's 1,000 other endophytes in the plant, it's hard to test, and then making sure that there's enough of the fungus to affect the insect. But it's a very cool system, and it's
yeah, that's super cool.
Fun.
Yeah, well, it's such cool biology, but also potentially really economically important. And
exactly.
Yeah, I mean that's a good way to kind of sneak in cool questions, is to kind of put them under the umbrella of pest management.
Exactly.
That's really cool. It's very smart. Do you know where the fungus is from? Like, is it from kind of the native range of wheat, or is it?
The ones that I tested were from Montana.
Okay,
they were gotten from infected larvae from wheat stems in Montana.
Okay.
So they were local.
But like originally, I guess, are a lot of endophytes really species specific, or are some of them kind of like broadly?
They're broad. Yeah, for the most part, they're broad. Cool. And in this case, the fungi have broad. They don't have specificity for the plant or for the insect.
Yeah, that was going to
They're
be my other question is what is,
generalists. Yeah,
oh,
they
cool.
just
So it's just
have this.
any grass, any insect or
It,
something like
I
that,
wouldn't
or
I wouldn't say
not
any
any,
because
but
we haven't
yeah,
tested them
right.
all. But the
But several.
species, so the species that I was working with were in the genus Bovaria and Metarhizium, and they are known to infect a ton of different insects,
Mm,
and and to be endophytes in a bunch
cool.
of different plants. So there's no specificity, which makes sense, right? Because I mean, on one hand, it makes sense because if you can infect anyone, your bases are covered. You might not be as efficient, right? Because then it's not as
Right.
optimized. On the other hand, if you think about an agricultural landscape where you have a monoculture,
Oh yeah.
maybe it would make sense to specialize. Maybe it's a matter of time. Maybe
Hmm.
things haven't been as intensively farmed for that long.
Yeah.
So yeah. um,
Hmm.
yeah, because I mean, and then we get into other questions like what's the generation type of this time of this fungus, and I have no idea.
Yeah.
What's an individual? I also don't know. I mean, we do know we can get a genome and distinguish individual A from individual B, but in the fields, because there's a lot of asexual
Right.
reproduction,
Oh wow.
it's complicated.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So with the endophytes, yeah, so it is a thinking that it might be like kind of one individual endophyte per wheat stalk or something, or
You mean? We have no idea.
yeah, you just don't know.
My
Okay.
guess
Yeah.
is that it wouldn't. I don't know. That's a good question. Maybe in some species we have some idea of how many individuals there are. I know for
Hmm.
some trees, for in some pathogenic species or some species that colonize wood,
Yeah.
you can see lines where the fungus are,
Oh,
right,
okay.
and you can see
You
delimitation
can
because
literally
they,
just connect the
yeah,
hyphae kind of. Yeah.
or you can see they stain the wood, so
Oh,
you
okay,
could
gotcha.
so you can actually see where the different individuals are. But most endophytes, especially in grass like
Yeah.
things, you
You'd
don't
have
know.
to, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So there's a lot of challenges in working with fungi because there's a lot of basic biology that we don't know. Just the
Yeah.
fact that you can't count individuals
Right.
easily. I mean, it's just basic because if you're working with ants or if you're working with elephants,
Yeah.
you go to the fields like 1, 2, 3. It's easy.
Right. Right. Ants is actually a little, people go back and forth on ants a little bit just because they're colonial. And
True,
so
true,
some
true.
that is it's a little bit weird to talk to like for pop gen and stuff, just because
Oh,
the
okay, yeah,
workers are so often sterile and they're
sure,
usually sisters and they're, so
true.
with ants is kind of a
Ants,
weird case, but I definitely get what you mean
yeah,
with
yeah,
most
yeah. So
animals for sure.
maybe ants would not.
Sawflies for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Or
Yeah, which
elephants
are
and
also
zebras.
hymenopterans. Yeah, or elephants or
Exactly.
lions.
Or
Yeah,
elephants.
yeah,
Yeah, or lions
yeah.
or
Trying to make
zebras.
this
Or
as accessible as possible. Yeah.
I know. But yeah, no, but that makes it a little difficult for us because there's a lot of basic things that you don't know,
Right.
and in that it's not immediate to get an answer. You have to use like these indirect methods, and there's error associated with them, and it's expensive and time consuming.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So do you have a little bit of time to talk about why fungi might be more species specific than others? Was that kind of your?
Yeah, well, I can try to give you an answer. I don't know. So we
You
don't
don't know the
know.
answer. Yeah.
What
Yeah.
we know
Why is
is
the
that
question interesting?
the question is interesting because you would expect um, to be able to optimize colonization
Hmm.
to a partner, or optimize in it. You can think of mutualisms, or you can think about host pathogen interactions. If you can optimize your interaction with your host or with your partner,
Right.
you would make that interaction more efficient, right? uh, the problem is that you can get pigeonholed.
Right.
And if your partner disappears or is in low frequency and you're too specialized,
Yeah.
you're out of luck because you won't be able to persist. So
Yeah.
the other approach is just to be a generalist,
Hmm.
and again, make it work. Doesn't have to be perfect, but be able to associate with many different partners.
Yeah.
And that ecologically can give you an advantage because depending on who's available, you're not dependent on who is available, right?
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
you can always associate with them. For example, for mycorrhizal fungi, for the most part, for ectomycorrhizal fungi, there is not a lot of host specificity, strict host specificity, like species of fungus to species of plants.
Yeah, it might be like a family of plants or something.
Exactly,
or, yeah.
exactly, and it means that they have this toolkit that works for this bin of the plant world, right? There's one of the exceptions is the genus Swillus. It's a bolete-like mushroom that is very slimy. It's called a slippery jacks, and they tend to associate more with conifers. And so it's one of the big examples of the ectomycorrhizal world that is known to have more specificity.
But I feel like ecologically, conifers are often found in kind of like, monotypic stands or whatever. You know what I mean? Like it seems like maybe there's higher, lower species diversity sometimes in conifer forests, or
plant diversity, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, sorry.
Don't know.
Conifer diversity, lower conifer diversity in conifer forest than like a mixed deciduous forest, where there's like
you might be right on that, and then maybe in the end it doesn't really matter for them because that's what they have available. But it is, and there are, when you walk into an oak forest or you walk into a pine forest, from an ectomycorrhizal standpoint, you kind of expect some groups of fungi to be more or less predominant. But again, the diversity is so high. It's I don't know if it's as high as endophytes, but it's very, very high.
Super high, yeah.
And that makes it difficult. And
so Sarah, so just for the outsiders, Sarah did her PhD on pretty much just oak tree mycorrhizal diversity, right? But in two very different soil types. And just tons and tons of diversity just with one tree.
Yeah, exactly. So I studied the effect of this harsh soils that are rich in heavy metals, naturally rich in heavy metals. They're called serpentine soils. And I compared the mycorrhizal fungi associated with the same oak tree species growing on these two soil types. And it was a mess because there's just so much diversity.
We don't have to totally get into that, but just it's such a cool system because the soil type changes really abruptly too. So this is there's not like a lot of sort of immigration. There's not a lot of boundaries for gene flow potentially.
Exactly, and this was a very small geographic region, so that everything, it's basically like one of the nature's perfect experiments where everything else is controlled and what varies is the soil type. And so that was an eye opener for fungal diversity for me, for sure.
But so I guess, and I don't, and please just don't feel like you have to stay on the line because I know you're like going off to do stuff.
I have 3 more minutes.
Okay, cool. So why does specificity? Why do you think specificity is advantageous in some cases? Or do you think there are certain sort of trophic or sort of ecological relationships that select more for specificity?
Yeah, I think it's in the end, it's about the abundance and the availability of the partner. So if your partner is very abundant and available, it's okay to specialize because you're not going to get there's no downside, right? And another advantage of specializing is, as I was saying, you can optimize your interaction. For example, if you're a pathogen and you're specialized, it means that you're going to be able to evolve the specific steps that you need to be able to invade that host effectively, and that you're going to be able to get everything that you deserve from this interaction. While if you're a generalist, you might not be able to optimize that well. So it means that you might be you might not be as effective at getting as much as you need from the interaction.
Right.
But then the downside is if your host goes away, you go to, like the enter-smut fungus that I was talking about earlier. For the most part, there's a one-to-one relationship between the fungal species and the plant species, but it's very but it's a tricky approach, because if the plant goes away, the fungus has no way to, because it can't infect anyone else.
Yeah.
Right? And just to go back to that sorry, I love that system. So because the fungus replaces the pollen, in what that means for the plant is that the plant can no longer reproduce, so it castrates the plant, right? If you're castrating your hosts, and if you're host specific, you might get in trouble, right?
That's a risky business right there. Yeah.
Exactly. So one of the ways that in this system things are maintained is that they tend to be very localized. The distribution of the fungus tends to be very localized and small. And also it seems, we don't know much about the biology of the infection, but it seems like plants are only infected in certain stages of their life cycle, which means that there's always a bunch of individuals that escape the infection, the plant, and they maintain the plant populations. But it is risky, right?
Yeah, so that's a situation where you might have a lot of negative intraspecific density dependence or something like that, you know, where
exactly.
if there's a lot of you around, it makes it worse for you, kind of thing.
And the thing is, you're shooting yourself in the foot, because the more you flourish, the worse it is in the long term.
Yeah. That's cool. Well, there's probably a good lesson, a good life lesson in there somewhere. Yeah. Don't flourish too much, kids. Don't be too successful. You'll shoot yourself in the foot somehow.
I think that is very true for in many occasions.
Careful what you wish for. Careful, yeah. You might end up in a faculty position.
Exactly. So, but that is true in terms of, if you think about population growth, for example, if you're doing very well, at some point you're going to hit a wall, right? Because it's just not going to be sustainable.
Yeah, there's some carrying capacity at some point.
Yeah. Exactly.
Cool. Well, I want to let you go. I thank you so much for taking some time to do this. It was really great to catch up with you. I hope it's not another 6 years or whatever before we see each other again.
I do too. Yeah. Well, good luck, and thank you so much for inviting me. It was really
awesome.
fun.
All right.
Yeah.
See you later, Sarah.
See ya. Bye. Take care.